WeOmaha News on KPAO.
Hi, welcome to WeOmaha News. My name is Deshaun Cunningham.
And I'm Kitrin Cycle.
This week we're going to talk about urban farms in Omaha.
Have you noticed when you drive around East Omaha and North Omaha that many vacant lots have been turned into little gardens and urban farms?
To learn more about urban farms in North Omaha, we spoke with Leo Lewis of the Malcolm X Foundation. Many people say North Omaha is a food desert, that there are not enough grocery stores, period, or not enough nutritional food sources available. To learn how that can be changed, we talk with Leo further. So we're here with Leo Lewis of the Malcolm X Foundation, and we're here to talk about their urban farm that they're building out back. So Leo, how long has this plan been on the drawing board before it actually had shovels in the ground?
Are you referring to the garden and the farming?
Yes.
That was on the plans prior to me becoming a board member. I became a board member in 2010, so this goes back as far as the 90s. I don't have the specific time because there was someone else who did the garden, which was Lisa, and she still does a lot of work with the garden. But I've been involved since 2010.
Okay. Now, since you've been involved, what has been, well, actually, first of all, who's the group that is currently taking over the farm, or running the farm now?
There are multiple organizations that work with us, one in which is Omaha Permaculture, and Elizabeth Ariano also works with the Kids Garden Club.
Okay, so what are some of the goals that you see from this farm? Do you see it being, a lot of people have gardens or farms as hobbies. Do you see this being something as a hobby type or more involved than that?
We have multiple components. We have the garden, we have the greenhouse, and we also have an actual farm area. So we have multiple components. People can come in at entry level and learn how to just basic garden. People can come in and actually use the greenhouse for seeding and planting for individuals who are really serious about starting their seeds early. And then we have the farm component for people who are serious about commercial farming.
Okay. So what kind of things do you plan on growing here? Fruits, vegetables, what actually will grow here, do you know? Or?
A number of things: fruits, vegetables, watermelons, collard greens, turnips, the things that people like to eat. Yeah.
It looks pretty pricey, the greenhouse. Did you have to get funding for that, or was there individual donations?
It's a partnership with Omaha Permaculture. So Gus Van Roem and Omaha Permaculture actually purchased the greenhouse and thought, well, I could put it at the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation. So he spoke to Lynn Friesen, who came to the Malcolm X Foundation, and Lynn pitched it to the board accepted, and so now we're in partnership with Omaha Permaculture to build this greenhouse.
Okay, awesome.
Now, when you talk with people in North Omaha in this area about that you guys are putting a farm in, what do people think about it? Are they excited about it? Are they confused? Especially on something this scale, what is the community's thoughts about what you guys are doing here?
Most people love it. They want to get involved, but most people don't have the time to get involved or necessarily the know-how. So this is where we have to have our educational component, because there are many people who are interested in it, but they just don't know where to start.
Are you going to try to go organic?
Always.
Okay.
Yes.
When are you hoping to have your farm completed, or is it going to be completed in phases?
It will be done in phases, but this year we will get a great start on it, turn the soil and get some plants in this season.
And what part of the farm are you most looking forward to? What excites you about it?
The farming, the actual farming aspect. Coming out every day, watering, weeding, and just checking things out.
And you said you're going to sell some of the vegetables, right?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so will there be a little vegetable stand here? Will people have to come here to buy them, or are you going to sell them at farmers markets?
We haven't made that decision yet, but we're definitely looking at doing a farmers market.
Okay.
And even running an independent farmers market just to show the community that it can be done.
It can be done here in North Omaha.
Yep.
Okay. We also spoke with Gus Van Roen, who is a permaculture expert. Okay, Gus, tell us what permaculture is.
Permaculture is a community way to bridge the gap between people and nature. We look for sustainable solutions to create abundance of food, energy, and clean water and clean air in your neighborhoods.
Okay, so give us an example.
Well, an example...
Is it like everybody having their own garden, or what's your fantasy?
I guess basically permaculture, has its most practical applications in a city or in a town or in a neighborhood and community, when you're relying on the commons to kind of help each other and mostly those people that are capable and able to kind of follow through on sustainable projects and create abundance just in passive means, and be able to then donate your extra time, money, and energy once you've created your own abundance to those that are less fortunate and are not as capable to deliver that for themselves.
Now, this is a business for you, permaculture.
Yes.
So, for instance, is it landscaping basically, but landscaping with perennials as opposed to annuals? And
that's a very good description. I think there are a lot of different descriptions, but for me, as a private endeavor, I have used the kind of need of having really design-based systems that use nature and mankind's, objectives to kind of have more food and not really spend as much money to create infrastructure in their neighborhoods. So I combine those needs and those desires to create designs for residences, farmers, conventional and organic farmers, or even businesses that want to create a sustainable, efficient business.
so you've done some big gardening projects for corporations?
Well, I guess not for big corporations. I think I've helped out the Nebraska Farmers Union. That's about as big of a corporation that I've helped out.
What'd you do for them?
Well, I guess for a lot of different projects, I help advise them on their current Big Red Worms project in Lincoln. I have also helped out a lot of their constituents and members who would love to put in sustainable community gardens or gardens within their communities. And because the Farmers Union definitely is out to help protect the small farmer and small communities, I end up mostly donating a lot of my designs towards these efforts.
Okay. And who are your clients? Like, you have to keep yourself afloat. So how do you manage that balance between, I have to do this to pay my bills, and then I'm going to do this to give back?
Well, I guess I really make that distinction myself depending on the type of product or project in front of me. If it has a community-based orientation, I do not want to charge anybody, because I know that's really the point of permaculture, and I really don't want to raise anyone's red flags in terms of, hey, I'm benefiting and monetarily from any situation that I know really should be the whole point of permaculture. So yes, I do need to make money for myself, and I really reserve those types of projects for the businesses, the farms that really want to, make the next step up in terms of efficiency. Backyard enthusiasts, those people who own a second home or a second farm. Farms that are so big that they really don't quite know how to look at the micromanaging around the farmstead itself.
What was your major in college?
I'm an anthropology and sociology major from Creighton University.
And how did you wind up in basically gardening and ag almost?
Sure. Well, actually, a lot of the, the jobs I took on while I was going through school were a lot of manual labor jobs. And I really love working with my hands. I guess working with my hands is strong through my family. I have really strong male role models in my family that were carpenters, that were farmers and gardeners, and people that were really active in their community. And so I guess I felt like I took the perspective and the eyeglasses of being an anthropology major and took it into truly to heart to see how I can make a difference in my community through, I guess, what is not so popular here in the Midwest is using our natural surroundings as a way to benefit us.
Why do you say it's not popular?
Well, I guess one of my elevator speeches used to be that...
A speech that takes 2 minutes, the speech you could give going up in an elevator.
So, because a lot of times I have to explain permaculture in a very quick way to a lot of different people in different walks of life. And I guess one of the ways to describe permaculture is that it's kind of doing what our great-grandparents used to do, but obviously accepting the new modern innovations of solar power, wind power, and anything that is really accrued knowledge that we are now privy to on the internet.
when I drive around the suburbs and I look at those lawns, those monoculture lawns, those perfect green lawns that don't have dandelions in them, me personally, I'm envisioning the mountain of fertilizers and pesticides that create those lawns. And I wondered if there's anything that, like, I would love to have a public art project that tries to calculate the pounds of fertilizer that we put on the suburban lawns, and then to create, like even if you just had a balloon, like one of those weather balloons, to show how high that pile would be, and that pile is going two places, into the Platte and into the Missouri. And I think if people understood that your beautiful lawn is creating this runoff that is, filled with chemicals that are winding up in the Missouri, which is, a drinking water supply for people downstream, I think we could reach them. I don't think they understand how big that mountain of fertilizers and pesticides and fungicides is.
And that's a very good point. I think a lot of people, when they think of the term permaculture, they think, oh, this is the edible landscape guy. And a lot of that is what I would love to champion and talk about. But really the biggest issue in front of Nebraskans and Omahans is really how to remediate and minimize the use of the greenscape, the manicured lawn. And if you're able to maintain a manicured lawn without needing the fertilizers and all the amendments, then I'm all for it, because people do love football in our state, and it is definitely a cultural expression. And while a lot of people may not imagine that they're going to go outside with their son and throw the football in front of their manicured lawn, there's still a park at least 3-4 blocks away that you could still do that if you didn't really value your yard as a manicured green space. The alternatives for having a manicured green space that you have to toil over all over summer and sweat and bag your lawn clippings and everything, the alternative is really to create a prairie and little prairie wetland moments where otherwise, as you were mentioning, a lot of our streets are now conveyors of all of this fertilizer and runoff that comes off of our landscapes. Well, imagine if our landscapes were actually the place that absorbed and filtered like it was meant to do before it enters our aquifer or even our subsurface soils. And a lot of that is where the nutrition, all the leaves that we would otherwise bag and put to the curb, well, the trees drop the leaves to replace the nutrition back to their soil. And when we remove that, we're removing the fertilizer that would naturally always be returned back to the soil.
How long do you think it would take to create a shift where people valued messiness as opposed to perfectly, everybody's yard looks like a golf course?
Well, if you would have asked me that question 5 years ago when I started doing what I'm doing and becoming more of an advocate of this natural way of managing your landscapes and green spaces, 5 years ago I would have had wow, that cliff is formidable. I don't know how we're going to do it. It's a culture. It's a sea change culture thing and a sea change tipping moment that I have to see. Well, here I am now 6 years later, and I'm watching a lot of people and my colleagues and partners in the city all relatively saying the same thing now. We're all kind of united on this message that our green spaces are too manicured and they're too micromanaged, when in reality, nature does this a lot better. And nature figures out the winners and the losers on your landscape much better than we can go in and control things. And so now I'm not saying we're at a tipping point in Nebraska, whereas I feel like on the coasts, when places like Portland and Vancouver, normally very rainy, wet parts of our country have to go through a drought like they did last year. You take a few moments like that, and then the society is going to change. All of a sudden, now there's rain gardens in Portland, and now all of a sudden they've changed their planting strategies. Here in Omaha, where I was saying earlier about the elevator speech about Nebraska, we're in the land of cheap energy and cheap water. Until anything really hits our pocketbooks to affect why we manage something differently, we're really not going to change much of the culture here in Nebraska. And on a macro scale here in Nebraska, the conversation is kind of being moved in that category, mostly because of the property tax discussion. Whereas large farmers and small farmers really can't get into and be able to access land when you consider how much people are charged for having property taxes. And large-scale management is definitely changing the picture here of Nebraska farming.
So we hear you're building a greenhouse.
Yes.
To help out a community organization.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the greenhouse?
Yes. The greenhouse is a neat little pet project of our organization at Omaha Permaculture. We're a local nonprofit, 501c3, and our board has decided to bring the concept of a geothermal greenhouse to a low-income community organization to demonstrate a concept of how you can grow food all year round in the protection from the elements in a very stable situation and with almost no energy and very minimal water maintenance.
And we went to the site and we saw a lot of tires, and I thought they were rubbish, but it turns out the tires are part of the design.
Actually, if I were to characterize the design of this greenhouse, and it's something that I guess I gleaned on the design prospects of other superstars in greenhouse building throughout the world, is to combine it with something that's called an earth ship, and that's Mike Reynolds. He's an architect that actually turned away from the architecture field decades ago and decided to try building everything with recycled materials. And so his tire wall, which is a rammed earth tire wall.
Rammed earth, what does that mean?
Pretty much it's a labor of love in the sense that you are putting earth into the cavity of a spare tire, and in order to make sure it fills all the gaps uniformly throughout there and then it doesn't settle over time with water or air or wind or anything, that you actually have to physically get there and hammer it in there. And so you can use a tamper, you can use a lot of construction types of compaction devices to do that, or as Mike Reynolds kind of likes to tell people, if you're building your own earth ship, you should really sledgehammer each rammed earth tire yourself.
How tall will the tires be? How many can you stack before they become tippy?
Well, it depends on the project, but for the greenhouse, where we're doing a full wall that is 50 feet long.
And how tall?
And it'll probably end up being 14 feet tall.
Okay.
So it's going to be very large and very formidable. And the design is going to have a latticed brick overlapping structure, so the course above the tires will be overlapping the underlying course of tires. And at incremental moments where the ribs of the legs of the greenhouse come up to shore up the tires, we will also be reinforcing it with rebar that go in, not going into the actual earth itself, but actually reinforcing itself to the greenhouse, because as a structure, everything will be concreted down with footings.
Okay. All right, any other projects around town you want to tell us about that Omaha Permaculture is doing?
Well, I was happy to talk about the Malcolm X greenhouse, and honestly, that's actually the cherry on top for all of our efforts. The guts of what we do is really manage open, vacant lots for the city and low-income communities. So we're trying to be a solution for communities to create sustainable land stewardship. And
do you know how many lots approximately that you're helping to manage?
Well, for the city planning department, right now we have 9 lots.
Okay. But spread out throughout Omaha, or concentrated in?
Concentrated in North Omaha.
Okay.
And we have since then also realized that through the Land Reutilization Commission that we are able to acquire our own land. And that's kind of the position that Omaha Permaculture, our nonprofit, wants to position ourselves towards, is to demonstrate efficient and sustainable land management and stewardship. And so we are partnering with a lot of organizations like the city parks, Keep Omaha Beautiful, Omaha by Design, to how to manage our public spaces so that they're more efficient. They're not relying on irrigation, they're not relying on fertilizers, or they alleviate, stormwater issues, or somehow control soil erosion. So there are a lot of beneficial needs that a lot of these these random vacant properties are not addressed at a municipal level, just simply because there's so much of it.
Mm-hmm. So is the stormwater ordinance fairly new here, or has there always been some kind of stormwater management, or has it just been upgraded?
I think the CSO project is probably, I hate that I don't know the date, but it's about 10 years old. But the CSO project is very instrumental in actually, mostly from a municipal standpoint, in realizing that there are parts of the cities that don't have the capacity to drain the water after a large rain event, a 5-inch rain event, which last summer we had 2 of. And given that that predicament, which a lot of Midwestern cities are now addressing, because we have more and more paved surfaces that are collecting more and more water to these little funnel spots.
So you want to hold the water where it falls and get it to drain into the ground where it falls, instead of going into the street and going into the gutter and overwhelming the sewer system and then ultimately winding up in the river.
Exactly. And Omaha is a spread out enough city where we have actually a decent amount of land, and we haven't just gobbled up all our land with larger, development projects. We are spread out wide. We have a lot of concrete and asphalt here, but at the same time, we're not as bad as other cities, because we actually have a lot of open, forgotten, neglected land that could be used for such reasons.
I noticed there's a rain garden up the street, right at the bend in Military, across from the Buc-ee's. It looks like it used to be a street, and they just turned it into a rain garden. Did you have anything to do with that?
I did not.
You did not, okay.
It ends up being one of the...
But that's a perfect example of a rain garden. It's like, that's what it is.
That's right. That ends up being one of the most popular versions, and a lot of people ask my opinion about that one in our area. And it's great that the city used it as a very prominent spot as the entrance into Benson. So it's a really nice conversation piece.
So tell us about your ponds out back, why you put them in, and how they don't turn all scummy and disgusting.
Sure. With the ponds in the backyard, I have about an 1/8 acre property, and it is all sloping back to our building. Over the years, I guess I've used the yard to kind of funnel water where I want it to go, and alleviating a lot of the storm runoff from my roof. So I use the storm runoff from my roof to capture into large ponds, and then let them overflow into each other, kind of cascading into many other little teardrop ponds in my yard. And the reason I'm trying this approach, which sounds kind of crazy to have 5, 6 random ponds in the middle of the yard, little small teardrop ponds. Basically, the soil in my backyard is compacted and old, and it's mostly clay. And even in my best efforts of trying to add more soil on top by bringing in leaves and hay and letting the chickens graze on it and so forth, really in the middle of a dry summer moment, I will still have cracked soil in the middle of my paths or in between beds. And just to kind of test if there's any remediation I can do on that, I've made all these teardrop ponds to see if the water that perspires from the pond and evaporates every morning triples the amount of dew that you would otherwise see in your yard, thereby hopefully eliminating cracked earth in the middle of a permaculture garden. The reason I'm trying this is, and unfortunately I haven't seen the right situation for it, the last 2 summers we've had more than enough rain, so we really didn't get a chance to test a dry summer moment. But the system, if it is truly resilient, will hopefully keep moisture and retain it in the yard.
And you have fish in those ponds.
And we have fish in the ponds that are actually keeping the insect larvae at bay, making sure that they don't take off. And the goldfish, you can use mosquito minnows, you can use anything that you can find in your area, maybe at a local bait store. And basically the goldfish will be eaten probably by your raccoons, but anything that is a little more camouflaged or has habitat to hide will last the whole year and probably last through the winter through the ice.
We also spoke with Matt Cronin, a friend of ours who used to be with the Big Muddy Urban Farm and now is with the Big Garden. They just got a new building just north of Sorensen Parkway that they wanted to show us.
All right, we're here with Matt Cronin of not Big Muddy anymore, but Big Garden. So tell people a little bit about what you guys do here at Big Garden and what your future plans are.
Yeah, the Big Garden, we've been around for over a decade now. What we do is, when we first started, it was all about just building gardens. It was started by a pastor who realized all these churches have so much space, and a lot of their work revolves around serving folks in the community that don't have access to fresh and local foods. And so it was just a recognition that all this green space, look what we can do with it. But quickly realized, you put in gardens, people don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to save seed, they don't know how to, grow food, and how to then save it and also cook with it. And so it was on that when our new educational coordinator, Katie Kahi, she's not new now, she's been around for 4 years now, she started developing a curriculum for our youth and working in the schools. And so from that, we've pivoted from just being an organization that builds gardens to any community garden that wants one, but instead really trying to hone in on working with youth, developing in child care facilities. We have a little partnership with CHI right now where we're working on getting gardens into child care facilities, and we're working right now to try to integrate our work into OPS curriculum to fit their science standards to be able to give every kid an applied education.
Okay, so now how did you get involved with, because we're trying to get away from calling it community gardening and calling it urban farming. Yeah. A lot of people think this can be a hobby, but when you can put the work into it, you can actually produce a lot. So how did you get involved in gardening and then getting up to something like this? I
started an urban farm 4 years ago called Big Muddy, and it one step at a time. You have big dreams, but in this town, everything starts from the ground up, and we have terrible soil. It didn't used to be that way, but since our Sarco plant contaminated everything, all the backfill they bring in, it's just lifeless dirt. And so it starts from just trying to build up, trying to create a nice permaculture environment to help rebuild the soils first and foremost. I got done with school. I went to school in Minnesota and graduated in 2011 and knew this was my home. I love Minneapolis, but they're already 10 years ahead of us, and so anything. Bring it back home and show them how to do it. Well, I didn't study agriculture or anything like that. I studied urban planning and urban studies, as well as different sustainability and social justice elements, and came back and realized my back was soft, my hands were soft, and had some friends that wanted to start an urban farm, Katie Kahi, Tyler Magnuson, and a couple other folks, and just kind of went from there. They're like, you want to start a farm? Not knowing what the hell that meant or how much energy and time that would take. I said, yeah, I'll start a farm. That sounds great. And it turned into 4 years of just being a beast of burden, which is what it requires a lot of the time. And then transitioning into this position, it's a little bit different goals. Your question about difference between urban farming and gardening, there is a livelihood to be made off of it. I think the challenge is what is your goal? We had the goal of Big Muddy of providing to our neighbors, providing local quality produce to our neighbors. We have food that's inherently undervalued in our system, which makes that any work that we're trying to do, if we're trying to make any profit, undercuts us. And then realize, we live in poor neighborhoods, trying to sell that food at any sort of accessible level, we also need to undercut ourselves. And so, there are ways to make it. It just requires specialized markets. If we sold all to high-end restaurants and try to just grow premium crops, you definitely can make a living. I think the main difference between gardening as a little hobby, it's a quality of life issue where urban farming, if we start to change our culture to instead of treating it as just like, oh, look at your nice little garden, and being like, oh, look at how much money you're saving, or look how much quality food you're able to produce in such a little space. I think when saving seed and preserving our food starts to become more commonplace, I think that's where that culture shift starts to happen.
Why do you think it's important for people to know and be able to grow their own food versus just being able to go and purchase the same thing from the grocery store?
Because it's not the same thing, first off. It's this cultural knowledge that's just been lost, right? We have this generation where, I work with kids all the time, and I ask them, where's your food come from? They say the grocery store. Where's your water come from? The faucet. Where's your electricity come from? The light switch. And it's that disconnect that has really set us up, and that is detrimental to our culture as a whole. How do we change that? It's important for a number of reasons. The quality of the produce is significant. So you're paying $2.50 a pound for tomatoes in the store. Some hothouse tomato grown in California, very best O'Neill. Not that the flavor is not that good, And if you really break it down, how much does it cost for a single seed of that plant that will produce 25 pounds, over the season? It's getting people to be invested in the long haul, because we're just in this age of convenience still, or at least hopefully on the end of the age of convenience, where people start to recognize that sure, you can get that cheeseburger for $1, or you can get that tomato right now, but the quality and also how much money you save over the long haul. I hope that's where we can start to mend those divides.
So how much food could a person realistically, say they have a yard that's like a 1/8 acre, how much could they actually use that to produce food? Like rough estimates, or it just depends on what you grow?
It depends on what you grow. It's a hard question. Way more than you think.
So what does grow better in Omaha or in the Nebraska area?
Pretty much we're mid-season or mid-level, so we can grow most anything here. And we have folks out in western Nebraska who are growing citrus trees in earthen greenhouses right now. But commonplace, you can grow all your basic greens, you can grow all your root vegetables, the radishes, your beets, your turnips. You can grow your squashes and pumpkins and gourds, all those with ease. Just recognizing seasonality, I think, is a big thing too. That's back to the convenience thing. It's recognizing that things come in at different seasons. We all want whatever fruit in the middle of the summer when it's really not the right time of year, or pomegranates during the winter. And it's just like, gotta respect seasons for what they are. We're pretty well adapted here. To extend our season, because that's another big thing, to be able to have more food. Simple plastic covers, little in the ground hoop houses, pretty much you can extend your growing season significantly by a good month in either direction. What was your question? I'm sorry.
Most common questions that new people
Most common questions? Yeah, where do we get soil? What will it cost me? I think there's this conception, and Big Garden builds this, continues this idea that the way that you build a garden and the way you build urban farm is with raised beds. And the reason we do that is because, like I said, a lot of our soils are still contaminated, and while the city does abate it by tearing it out and burying it, you still have lifeless stuff there. And so it takes not generations, but 4 years before you can get that soil really up to snuff, unless you're really nurturing it on the daily. Just where do I get my plants? How do I get things started? Yeah, that's really the big things, is how do we get soil? Trying to change, like I said, the perception of what gardens look like, because people like this really clean look, but there's ways of doing it that are less straightforward or less clean cut, but just as effective and a lot less cost prohibitive, a lot less inputs.
Okay. So one last question. What is your favorite part of being involved with urban farming? Is it the work? Is it being able to teach people? What do you get most out of doing this?
It's been years in the making. What I am most excited about in terms of where we're moving is trying to install and develop perennial food systems. And so food corridors and fruit forests, and trying to change you get kids that you show them an apple tree and they're like, is that okay to eat? And it's like, of course it's okay to eat. It's right here.
Yeah.
It's free. It's the best sort of thing to get.
Yeah.
And so being able to get kids excited about that and teaching how to graft and how to pretty much just trying to spread the magic, because we know you can break it down, compartmentalize why you can graft things onto other trees, fruit trees onto other trees, or how you can just take some plants and just stick the leaf right in the ground and it'll just start coming up, like succulents and things like that. How you can just pluck a leaf and plant it and it'll start to grow its own roots. You can break that all down into all the different reasons why scientifically it is, but for kids and for adults, I think it helps just breed that excitement and that curiosity and wonder that is in all of us, but that we forget as we get older. So working with kids and getting them engaged through perennials, I think is really what excites me right now.
So have you done any kind of gardening at all? Or?
Well, when I was a child, my parents had gardens. We had a big garden in the front lot, and then we had another supplemental garden on the side lot. And there was one year where my mother canned, and down in the basement we had this whole area that was devoted to her canning, and we never ate it. When she died, I went and threw out like jars and jars and jars because, so yeah, we've gardened, we've canned.
Wow.
I might do it again someday, but it's a time thing. Gardening is time consuming. It's a lot of hard work. You have to, you just don't have a garden. I mean, if you plan to have a garden, you put some work into it.
Because I've never done any of it before. I think at most we did the grow the top of the carrot experiment in school. But as far as, I would say I've probably done more on ranching aspect as far as animal husbandry. Like my family's had horses, very briefly had cattle for a little bit. But the idea of a small urban farm, it is kind of odd. Like, you can't get that much food from a small lot.
You can.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, it's funny because in Pennsylvania, I've spent more of my time in Pennsylvania than Nebraska. In the fall, everyone's trying to give you tomatoes. Like everybody grows tomatoes, and then in the fall, guaranteed, people are like just giving tomatoes away because you typically get a bumper crop of them. So
it's like that here with apples. Mm-hmm. Like Applejack, that's pretty popular. So.
Garlic. I love garlic. That's pretty easy to grow. You really don't have to do a lot.
I would have never thought. For more information on the Malcolm X Garden, Big Garden, and permaculture, visit the WeOmaha News Facebook page.
The City of Omaha Planning Department also has a pamphlet that they put together to let you know what the zoning is in your part of town regarding urban farming.
And that's been our episode this week. Join us next time for another episode of WeOmaha News. I'm Deshaun Cunningham.
And I'm Kitrin Cycle.
Thanks for watching.
See you next week.
This has been WeOmaha News.